Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Retro Horror Academy. My name is Daniel Richardson. And yes, today we're going to be looking at the year 1896 in horror. Before we actually get started, though, I do want to kind of clarify some things. In the last video, the introduction video, we talked about how basically the concept of the show is going to be we're going to go through horror year by year and do a ranking, the top 10 horror films of that year, awarding the top three spots: the Golden Skull, the Silver Skull, and of course the Bronze Skull. However, like I mentioned then, obviously in these early years there will not be as many films to pick from because there just wasn't many films to pick from. Anyways, so that's that thing. However, there's a few other things we have to kind of go over. When me and the Academy sat down to discuss this, there's a couple things that we realized. The main thing is, what do we do with like lost films? The most famous lost film is, of course, the London at Midnight. No, yeah, London at Midnight. Lon Chaney, vampire. We all seen the pictures, jagged teeth and all that stuff. However, that's just that film is now lost to history, unfortunately. Like so many of these movies are. And I decided, unless the Academy has access to these films, we really can't rank them or review them or talk about them. Or we can talk about them, of course, but we can't really put them in an official ranking capacity. So we can't see it, we can't award it, the Golden Skull, if you will. And that's unfortunate, but that's kind of the thing. And then another thing is, really, horror is subjective. And obviously, what scares some people don't scare others. But I think, when we're sitting down to decide on what movies to, pass and which ones to, ignore, it is subjective. However, most horror, regardless of if it's scary or not, or what, scares you, the intent of horror all around is always to horrify, to shock, to scare, or whatever. Regardless if it comes off successful or not, that is kind of the thing. However, in these early years, because how we're compiling these lists, two basic sources. I'm going to Wikipedia, and as I'm looking on Wikipedia, I'm just grabbing the list of horror films off that, and then as I go to, I take that list, go to IMDb, and as long as it has horror listed in its genre filing, among its listed genres, as long as it has horror, then it kind of goes to the next stage. But then when you start looking at some of these, and a good example is The X-Rays, or The X-Ray Fiend, it's also known as, George Albert Smith film, and it's like it's listed and credited as horror, but like even when you watch it, it's like it's not like at all. It's definitely more sci-fi if anything else. And so we decided, as the Academy looked at this list of films, that there'll just be certain films that just won't go through. However, in these early years, that means you're going to be glossing over several years, if you will. So even though this is technically the 1896 episode, we're actually going to be kind of covering, as far as talking, 1896 all the way to 1899. So we're basically getting the 1800s out of the way. And yes, we'll review, we'll talk about horror in those 4 years. But as far as ranking goes, spoiler alert, there will only be one movie that will be ranked. So top 10, just the top movie of 1896, and that will be it. So one Golden Skull going out, in this episode. And this will kind of be the trend until we kind of catch fire and horror becomes more, mainstream, I guess. But yeah, that's it. If you guys have any questions, comments, leave them down below. Hit us up on social media, all that good stuff. So let's just get into it, shall we? 1896, the year in horror. It really was a brand new genre that was kind of accidentally created. Before then, obviously there has been horror on stage, in books, stuff like that. And it was, getting popular. Everybody, there was something about us that just love, to be scared, the macabre, the unknown. And so, no surprise that eventually film would catch on to this. But it's kind of interesting how film took this shape, because you gotta remember, in those early days of cinema, there was no cinema, there was no movies. The two films you'd either have would be these short, and I'm talking very short, we're talking like a minute, two max, just home video type stuff. Just, hey, here's people at the beach walking around. Here's the train car going by. Here's whatever the case may be. That's all that the initial films were, or they kind of like a documentary type stuff. Or there'd be these magicians who would use it in their act. Jordan, I'm probably gonna butcher his name. I apologize. George Méliès. I'm gonna say Méliès. He kind of created this whole trick photography type thing, and quite by accident. But when he realized through editing that you can make things disappear, he decided to incorporate that in his act. So, when Saturday Night rolled around and, they're having this big stage, hey, check out my magic, pulling the rabbit out of the hat. I'm sawing a woman in half. And look up here on the screen, and you're seeing him teleport, or, he's magically throwing a blanket on somebody and they, pulls it off and they're a skeleton. Magic. And that became part of his act. However, the first one that would happen, which was has been titled, The House of the Devil, or The Haunted Castle, depending on which country you saw this in. But it had the opposite effect. Like, it didn't just amaze and awe the crowd. It terrified them because going back to the 1800s, now we watch it looks hokey or whatever, but back then, when you're watching these films, you gotta remember, this is a brand new medium. Like, no one saw moving pictures, if you will. There's a famous story about, the first time they did the locomotive coming at the screen, which was just, achieved by digging a hole underneath the train track, and then putting the camera up here and the train going over it. But the first time people saw that, they lost their shit, because they're like, oh my God, there's a train coming through the wall. Damn, And so, at that point, no one's ever, everybody saw pictures, they saw photographs, they never saw actual moving pictures. And so, when you see The House of the Devil, and you're seeing, what's supposed to be Satan and these two explorers and all these, ghosts and bats and people morphing and teleporting or whatever, yeah, it probably freaked a lot of people out. And George Méliès was kind of the pioneer of all this. He's, I definitely dub him like the great-grandfather of horror for sure. Whether he intended to or not, he created a whole new, genre. And many other people follow this. I mentioned earlier, George Albert Smith from Britain did the same thing. He was kind of like the George Méliès of the UK, I guess, or Great Britain, where he made a lot of movies and used trick photography to do these. He did The Haunted Castle, which was very similar in plot to House of the Devil. And, like I said, you go and do the x-ray and photographing a ghost. And it caught on, eventually people in Spain would, start filming as well. Japan would catch on to it, and they would also start filming. So, right off the bat, it became this instant hit. And that was kind of it in the 1800s. Like I said, movies weren't necessarily movies, though. There was no story, no plot, hardly. It would come later, but initially what you saw would be, I guess you'd say, you see the trick, you would see the illusion, and that would be it. However, then as time passed, that illusion would be a part of a scene that had a beginning, middle, and end, and then that scene would be put together with other scenes, and before you know, you're actually telling stories. And that's how, cinema in general, not just horror, but just in general, came to be. So that's kind of the rundown right there. So let's, talk about, what got the, number one film of 1896. basically, it's Satan just conjuring up supernatural things, and that's it. This is the very first horror film. A lot of people agree on that. Some people will kind of incorrectly say this may be the first vampire film because Satan turns into a bat, and at the end, he is kind of chased away with a crucifix. I'm going to disagree just completely. The Academy believes that's bunk. It's Satan. Of course, a crucifix is going to freak him out and chase him away. And of course, yeah, he can turn into a bat. He's Satan. He can turn into anything. He's a shapeshifter. If anything else, this is the first shapeshifting movie ever made. But no, when you go back and watch, The House of the Devil, even though, but maybe by today's standards, today's eyes, you're watching, you're like, wow, this is kind of hokey, this is kind of cheesy. But back then, put yourself in 1896, you're seeing Satan for the first time on a big screen. That's got to be crazy. No, like I said, it definitely deserves a spot. It deserves the first Golden Skull for being the first horror film, for paving the way. It'd be ridiculous to say like without this there'd be nothing. No, I mean I'm sure eventually somebody would have came around with the idea to put the macabre and the mysterious and put Satan up on a big screen, but George was the first one to do it. And that was kind of his whole thing. I noticed throughout the history of his filmmaking, he did like over 500 films, and a lot of them would include Satan. So I don't know. Something there, I guess. I don't know. But yes, guys, that was the very first episode, 1896, here at the Retro Horror Academy. My name's been Dan Richardson, and you're dismissed.